So New York State Assembly Member Ni, welcome to the bridge, and let me start right in. So it's a great honor to talk to you in Boston, and I'm curious, what is the reason for your trip to Boston today?
Well, so I'm actually really honored because the amazing mayor, Michelle Wu, actually hosted a fundraiser for me here in Boston. So it was really, really great to be able to connect with so many people who are here and some of the supporters from all over the place who really want to have a lot of change in leadership, a lot of, leadership and representation within our Asian American community. And so I think that it's really, really amazing to be able to be here with everyone.
The fundraising is for your Senate?
For my Senate campaign in New York.
Yeah, why do you choose Boston? You know, you're in New York and you choose the fundraising in Boston.
So I fundraise in New York, obviously, but I think that it's really, this is my first time to fundraise in Boston, but Michelle wanted to, do something here, and so I thought that was really great, and I really got to meet a lot of people here in Boston, especially from the Asian American community. I'm from Chinatown, actually working to make sure that Michelle Wu won as Boston mayor, and I came down here to help her with her primary. Did a lot of phone banking, did a lot of calls for her, knocked on a lot of doors, but I think that it's really about making sure that we have the representation we want to see. So Boston's so lucky to have her.
Yes. Do you want to describe the relationship with Michelle Wu as a friendship or cooperation by two politicians?
Well, sure. I mean, we're all very similar in age, like me, Michelle, Stephanie Chang from Michigan, and we have a group of friends of AAPI legislators across America.
Yes.
So my mentor, who I also call Mom, her name is Sharon Tomiko Santos, and she's out in Seattle. And so she's one of the first Asian American women ever representing any kind of state level elected office, and so she's kind of a hero for many of us. And so with her, David Chu, who's now the city attorney for San Francisco, but he at the time was also in his state legislature and also represented San Francisco's Chinatown. And then my friend Fu Lee from Minnesota, who's part of the Hmong community, and he is a representative out in Minnesota, part of this huge wave of amazing Asian American representation from the Hmong community. And then, obviously me and Michelle, we were representing both of the Chinatowns when we first met within our cities. So, Manhattan's Chinatown and then Boston's Chinatown.
Yes.
And so when we were collaborating, we wanted to talk a lot about, how we could kind of really move our communities together, right, in unity. And I think that was really what was so important. We wanted to make sure that we had messaging that was going to be able to talk to so many of our communities and be able to, really be able to, I guess, hit the many layers of needs that our communities had, because we knew that there was, anti-Asian sentiment, there was a lot of need for us to be able to fight for resources for our communities that we never had before, and that we were all first and onlys in our own respective areas, and that's why it was so important for us to be able to have this kind of coalition, because in a lot of ways we were each other's support networks. So even when a lot of these harder moments came along in government, when there was the shootings in Atlanta, and then when we had several murders, when people were being pushed in subways on fire, all different kinds of really horrible things were happening to community members within our cities. We were able to check in on one another and also help each other with the response that we needed to have from each other. And so that's why it was so important for us to have peers, and have friends. And that's why it was something that was really helpful throughout this period of time, but also something that I really cherished.
Yes. Have you visited Boston Chinatown?
Yeah, I did. I visited Boston's Chinatown. I was actually handing out flyers and literature down there for Michelle during the primary. And Gary had invited me to actually go and have a dinner or lunch there, and but unfortunately, because we were so rushed, we didn't really get to go. But I was there for one of Michelle's endorsement announcements, and then we were there for a couple of different press conferences alongside. Oh my gosh, I already forgot who else was there with us, but we were there with a couple of other AAPI elected officials and an appointed officials, so it was really, really great.
Yeah. What do you think is different from New York Chinatown, or the same as New York Chinatown? Is there any difference?
Well, I thought that it was, really nice that the community really knew each other, and it's the same as in Manhattan's Chinatown. It's like you go down the street and you're like, hey, auntie, uncle, you talk to everyone.
Yeah.
And so everybody knew who Michelle was, and, we were walking down the street, and, in just like 2 blocks, it took us 25 minutes to to walk across the street because everybody wanted to say hello.
Yes.
So it was really, really nice to be able to see that kind of community and that, community heart, I guess, in both of our respective Chinatowns.
Yes, I just look at you and I suddenly feel like, have any media or your friends said that you look like a Taiwanese actress named Lin Yichen?
Yeah. I actually got in a lot of trouble because, I'm, obviously I'm a little chubby, but there was another, so when I was first elected, there was another Taiwanese newspaper that said that we looked alike. Yeah, and then I received a lot of hate comments because they were just like, who are you trying to insult? Are you trying to insult the actress or the politician? Like, they were just, it was like, oh no.
But people recognize that.
Yeah, I guess so. I think my very favorite Taiwanese drama was It Started With a Kiss with Lin Yichen and Zhou Chen. Yeah.
As a young and beautiful lady, so there must be some voices that say that you couldn't take on the responsibility of this political position, right? Because you look very beautiful and very young. People may doubt that if you can take on those, those obligations and those. How do you react to that?
I think that they only doubt women, and they only doubt younger women of color, and I think that it's interesting how they, I think that for a lot of us, Michelle, Stephanie, and I have talked about this a lot, and as a great mentor, Sharon Tomiko has talked me through a lot of it, because I think that, for a lot of women, and for a lot of, Asian American women, a lot of times, people will have a lot of these prejudices, not just, outside of our community, but even inside of our community, I think that a lot of times people will be like, oh, why don't you just let men do it? Why don't you just, what about having a family? What about, doing all these things? And I think that people will say, maybe you don't have enough experience. And a lot of times it's very interesting because they never think that a young man doesn't have enough experience. They think that young men are ambitious, go-getters, people who are, just, thoughtful beyond their time, right? But they always think women are maybe not experienced enough, even when you have 10 years experience, 20 years experience, I've had over 20 years of legislative experience, but it's never enough. Right, and I think that for a lot of women, we're always too something or not enough something. Right, and I think that that's what happens. It's sexism, it's racism, and it's very much very obvious. People ask me all the time, like, why don't you wait your turn, or why are you challenging somebody? Why are you giving this up to do this other thing? They always think that those comments are coming from a good place or a well-intentioned place, and it might be. Maybe, but it also comes from a place where there's a lot of internalized prejudices against, when a young person or a woman of color or, somebody who might look or think a little bit differently than them is willing to step up.
Yeah, I follow you on Twitter, and you are often a strong voice for the rights of women on social media. I love to hear your voice or views on the abortion bill that have been on everyone's mind recently.
Yeah, so it was a leak in the Supreme Court decision, and I think that it's really important that we're also, trying to codify the rights that women have into our federal law. And I think it should be in our constitution. It should be something that's amended and made, law for us. And I think that it's really important for all of us to be able to have the right to have bodily autonomy. I think that, people don't realize that all of our rights could be in danger. And I want people to also look at how that decision was made, because some of the wording of that decision, they talk about historical roots. They talk about the length of time in history. And I want people to remember that, we haven't, had a very long history of having any rights in this country. People forget that, it was only like 100 years ago that women could even vote.
Yeah.
And for women of color, even less, it wasn't until 1965. And, it wasn't until the Chinese Exclusion Act was lifted that Asian Americans could participate in government. And I think that it's really important for folks to understand that these are all things that are not rooted in history, right? These are things that we changed. And I think that, when we're talking about our rights and our ability to participate in government and our ability to have autonomy over our own bodies and have the ability to be able to say what we want to happen to ourselves and not, right? I think it's really important in this country's history of having a fight for freedoms and rights. And I think that, this is a very, very scary moment for so many people, for women, for people of color, and very low-income folks. Because I will say that an LGBTQ community, I think that it's very important for us to really talk about that, because it's something that Elizabeth Warren has said, and other people have said out loud. But very wealthy white women are still going to be able to go and have the health care that they deserve, but people who are low income, people who are people of color, people who have a disability, people who have other needs, they're not going to get the same health treatment. They're not going to get the same kind of health care. And I need to remind folks that, abortion is health care. And I think that it's really important that we're talking about it in healthcare terms. The right to having, actual health care that will be appropriate for you is very important. They decide not to give it to you.
Although right, not only the abortion right is very fragile for
absolutely,
women.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I reminded folks of yesterday was, there was a woman an Asian woman in my district in Chinatown when, back before, there were women's rights to vote. Her name was Mabel Lee. She was a suffragette, and she was somebody who, was willing to fight for other people's rights, and knowing that she wasn't going to get those rights for herself. And she was somebody who was willing to ride a horse into Chinatown to be able to fight for somebody else's rights, right? And a lot of times, we have to remember that even if we are not given the same kind of treatment, that we are fighting alongside other people to get the rights, so that we can also in the future get those rights. And I think that it's important to continue to fight and to make sure that we are able to, have that change for everyone.
Yes. So assuming that you are successful in office after this election, so what would you most like to do for your constituents?
Because I'm a sitting assembly member, I think that, I will want to continue on being able to serve as my constituents the way that I know that they have come to really get used to, which is being able to reach me at all hours of the day. It's really important for us to have that open and transparent government that we're always asking for. I'm always working to make sure that we have more representation, more voice in government. And I think that people have to realize that, I find it to be my goal to be obsolete. I hope one day I don't need to be here. I hope that we will be able to build a pipeline of young people, of people who are wanting to participate in government to be able to continue on this
Asian
path.
people?
Everyone, we should have diverse leadership, and it should be, we should have a lot more Asian Americans. We should have more people who have disabilities. We should have a lot more queer people, in office. We should make sure that people are getting the representation that we deserve, right? Because having a lot of different perspectives is the only way that we're able to have good policy. And so I want young people to step up, and I want people to, stop thinking that government is inaccessible. I think a lot of times, even when I was younger, I thought that government was this untouchable thing, right? And I think a lot of people feel that way, that rules and laws happen to us, but we don't get to impact them. And I think that there's a lot of people who are in power who don't want us to realize that we can impact and we can make that change if we wanted to and we were to speak up. So I think that really what's important is that we break that myth and help people to have access to government and help to make things more transparent. We should, increase language access and accessibility for our constituents. We should make sure that folks are able to, get the benefits that they deserve. I think that it's really important to protect folks in the consumer protection realm, make sure that people have access to wealth building tools and stopping folks from getting preyed on by, predatory financial services. So a lot of the things I'm working on are really geared towards anti-poverty work, because I think that, really kind of dismantling some of the things that trap people in the cycle of poverty or debt are the things that kind of make things more desperate for others. So it's a cycle that continues, but if we break that cycle, we can really change the way that everybody operates.
So the first thing you want to do in Senate is to bring young people to the government and bring government to community.
Well, I think that I've been doing it, but I think that I will continue to do that. But I think that one of the things in the Senate is to make sure that we're also calling out, calling out corruption when we see it, making sure that with that power of being in a room of 64 people rather than, a room of over 100, of 150 something people, it's like, it's really a really different, it's a different speed, right? It's a different kind of deliberation. And so you can impact what other people are thinking a lot easier and change the vote a lot of times. And so I think that it's really important that we're doing that as well.
You proposed the disaggregation bill of Asian American data by the ethnic group last year, and the government signed this bill. So how data disaggregation matters for AAPI?
So data disaggregation is so important for our communities because we oftentimes have invisible needs that people erase because they aggregate our numbers, right? So people don't know this, but in New York City, 1 in 4 Asian Americans lives in poverty. We are the most impoverished ethnic group, but we have the least amount of resources, and we access the least amount of resources. And I think that it's really important for folks to understand that, it's because of oftentimes language inaccessibility. It's because people have never included us in a budget before. A lot of these different things that make it so that we are erased or invisibilized. And without data disaggregation and without being able to see where the poverty is, people think that everybody is falling into that I guess fine category just because some people are doing okay. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that the model minority myth exists and then the perpetual foreigner syndrome exists, and both of these things are used as very similar flip sides of the same coin, right? The model minority myth is basically saying that we're fine and we don't need help, right? And then so that makes it so that they don't have to give us resources. And the perpetual foreigner syndrome is basically also saying, like, you don't belong here, so we don't have to give you resources. Both things make it so that they don't have to give us resources. And so it's really important for us to be able to figure out where in our community we need the most help so that we can put the resources there as needed. And the other thing is also making sure that we're providing services in the right way, right? So in New York, in just like the community in Flushing, in one street, from Main Street to Union Street, it's different languages are needed, right? It's Mandarin Chinese or it's Korean. And so if you just check the Asian box, how are they supposed to know what your senior grandmother needs for, services? They're gonna need to know what ethnicity you are, right? So if you are Korean American, it helps to know that you're Korean American so that they can provide somebody who is coming in to let you have services to speak in Korean, right?
Do European people also do that? Like check the box of their ethnicity? Yes?
I think that a lot of people who don't need language access services is probably a little bit different, but we have over...
Like German and France, they speak different language.
I mean, yes, but I don't think that, they're not getting services.
How do you describe services?
I mean, if you have an issue like, you need SNAP benefits, if you don't have food services, or if you don't have home care services, and you need to access home care services or food services, you should just go and make sure that you can fill out the forms, etc. But usually they don't provide it in all of the different languages in our Asian American dialogues, right? So they might provide something in Chinese, but they might not provide it in Bangladeshi or Nepali. But with data disaggregation, you are including a lot of different ethnic groups, the top 10 ethnic groups in New York, and so that makes it so that they can provide language access services for at least those top 10 groups, and then you can actually be able to document what the data is so that you know where the needs are. That way, the language access is very easy to gain, and then you don't have to worry about opening your door and then being like, oh, this is the person who speaks Cantonese when I am Bangladeshi.
Yes.
Right. And actually, people don't realize this, but Asian Americans have the largest undocumented community as well in New York.
Yeah. Because many, many Chinese groups has already spoken out against this bill. So
yeah, they are uninformed about what it actually does.
Yeah. Do you think they make sense? Their comments make sense?
No. No. I think that they don't understand how the bill actually works to make sure that we are actually getting services to folks better. I think that, in the very, very basic way, even the language accessibility piece is so important, don't you think?
Language access is important, and they're thinking of their concern is because Chinese is kind of much richer than any other thing, so they feel like their rights will be grabbed because of the bill. Which
I think is a very selfish way of thinking, and also one that is, which is also but it's also not true, right? We are already not getting services.
Yeah.
Our community is already getting less benefits, and so in the only way that if we actually disaggregate, it helps us to be able to get more services to our community groups, because we're not getting any right now. So it's 0% of 0 is how much? Even if 100% of 0 is how much, it's just still 0. So if you're not getting anything because they think that you don't need it, then what are they fighting for actually?
I get your point. So I recently read an article about your experience in overcoming autism, and I was quite impressed because you are now a very successful opinion leader for your community, and your experience will certainly give hope to many families with kids with autism. So what do you think was the biggest reason that made you overcome this unprecedented challenge?
I mean, I don't think it's unprecedented. I think probably a lot of people actually have, ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. Folks probably have, different levels. We're all on a spectrum, I think. We're all neurodiverse.
Yeah.
I think that, neurodiversity is very common within all of our communities, and I think that it's really important to talk about. But a lot of people have asked me, if there's one thing that you regret, what is it? And I think that it's probably not talking about it earlier, for folks to, actually be able to understand that, everybody could, actually do with more communication on, folks with disabilities, issues of disabilities that people should be able to openly have dialogue about, because I think in our Asian American community there's a lot of stigma when it comes to having your children or your loved ones diagnosed with any kind of disability or mental health issue, and I think that it's really important for us to have those dialogues, because we're all going to be older someday and maybe have disabilities, right? Every single conversation that we're having is important when we're talking about disabilities, because I think that this is an important lens for us to look through when we're looking at policies and when we're looking at legislation. If you can't look at any kind of issue without actually discussing what impacts it might have on folks in the disability community, then you're not actually having a full discussion of the issue, you know? Because I think that, you know, if we're talking about housing, we have to talk about disability issues. If we're talking about transportation, we should talk about disability issues. If we're talking about education, we should talk about disability issues.
Not a minority.
There's not a, it's not something that is out there or different for anyone. I think that we all have to be talking about these issues, and I'm really glad, because I think that in the Asian American community, we have, I have had so many conversations with parents who, you know, even on Weixin, you know, on WeChat, there's several groups of parents who are talking about, about having, you know, children who are on the autism spectrum, and some of the difficulties that they have, and some of the most amazing experiences that they have with their kids, with our school district, how difficult things can be, or how awesome a teacher is with somebody who is on the spectrum. And I think that's really important for us to, you know, have like a community that is able to actually talk about these things. And I think that it's really beneficial for us to have like an openness with that conversation. And I hope that, you know, my being open about it will continue to spawn conversations. Obviously, for myself, I had amazing parents that were willing to be very understanding in some ways, but also I will say that I think I've never seen my neurodiversity as something of a detriment in any way to how I live, but in actuality I see it as kind of a superpower. And I have to say that, you know, I think my parents also probably really liked it. Why? Even as a child, I think that there were some things that were very difficult. I know that there, you know, I was a difficult child, I think probably to my parents, and maybe a little bit unfair, you know, but you know, I think, you know, my grades were always very good. I was very good at piano, and I could focus on, you know, when there's something that I cared about, I focused very much on it, and I had like hyper focus, you know, and I think that my parents, they were okay with the fact that I wasn't super social. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't understand how to communicate with people in that way, and I think that they were just okay with me being at home and studying, you know, and reading all the time. I used to get in trouble for reading in class. I almost got suspended from school, actually. My mom saved me from getting suspended, but you know, she thought it was ridiculous that the school would try to suspend me from school for reading. She said, "Don't you want your kids to read?" But, you know, I was reading in math class, so it wasn't it probably wasn't ideal for my teacher. But
your math is good?
I mean, I was very good at math, but I was...
It's a stereotype.
Yeah, it was a stereotype. I don't want to talk about it. But no, my mom actually, you know, she made sure that I wasn't suspended from class, because they called her in and they said that, you know, the teacher was really bothered by my reading in class, or not, you know, not answering when my name was called, not paying attention to, you know, what was going on in my classroom, even though, you know, whenever she called on me, I would know the answer. Like, that wasn't enough for her. She wanted me to, you know, pay attention and not, you know, not take away from the rest of the class. I mean, I think that I still live with a lot of the things that I think that a lot of parents will note in their children. You know, I think that, you know, there's a lot of things that give me a lot of anxiety. You know, you'll probably notice that when I'm talking to you, I sometimes look down a lot, right? So, I mean, this is something that's really still something that's very difficult for me.
But I do that always, so...
Well, you know, there's a lot of things that are signs for being on the spectrum. But I also, you know, there's a lot of things that will, you know, probably be of note, you know, when people see like repetitive behaviors or certain things that will, you know, help you to, you know, notice it more. But for myself, I have a lot of tools now, because after I was diagnosed, I think this is why a diagnosis is important, even though a lot of times, you know, people do quite well without a diagnosis, and other people might notice it, but I think that it's really important for us to have the tools in our tool belt to be able to, you know, walk through things. And I had a really, you know, important, you know, person who helped me to kind of figure out some of the good tools to use to be able to, you know, navigate my world.
As a tradition for our program, you can speak to the camera here and to send a video message to the audience of this program, like anything you want to say to your constituents, to all the Asian people in Boston, or or everything you want to say. You can speak to the camera here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope that everybody will look at, signing on to our show. The Bridge is where everybody should be checking out more Asian American news.
Yeah, you can also speak Chinese.
大家好，谢谢你们今天可以跟我们在 The Bridge 一起聊一些我们AAPI community 的issue， 所以现在我们在纽约也是很高兴可以跟波士顿在一起就是合作，所以很高兴跟大家在一起，谢谢。